Ja, I know. Hey guys! Willst du mitmachen? Ah, okay. Okay, got it. Thanks. You don't want to. Okay. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about poetry. This is the first video of analyzing poetry or analyze a poem with me. I haven't sat in this chair for some time now. Thought to bring it back out for the poetry videos. So the videos will work like this. I will prepare a poem, and preparing means I will read it, analyze it to the best of my abilities, and just write my thoughts down and some things that I noticed, then I share them with you guys, and hopefully you guys will share your findings. And if you want me to analyze a poem, if you like my thoughts, that is, please leave some recommendations down below. Talk to me about poets you would like to talk about on this channel. I would like to do one video each month, so one poem each month, but if you really like these videos, I might do more. I want to say though, I am a novice. I am not an academic, although I study English and also study English literature and poetry, and I write poetry. It does not mean that my opinion, that my findings can be considered right, because poetry is for interpretation. It is in this world to be sort of adapted to your own life if you want to. Whatever I say, whatever my interpretation is, your interpretation can be something completely different, and that's the fun thing about poetry. I haven't done this so far because I'm always very nervous when it comes to this topic, especially when the poem itself and the poet himself we're going to talk about today is intimidating to me, which is Ocean Vuong. I, by the way, don't sit in the middle so that you can see all the things that I wrote down. I told you guys in my last video that I want to spend some time with Ocean Vuong's poetry this Pride month. I thought to set myself a bit of a challenge. As I said, analyzing his poetry is a lot of fun, but starting it is also very intimidating. Well, I'll talk about this when we actually start this poem. The poem we're going to tackle today is from the book Night Sky with Exit Wounds by Ocean Vuong. It's his first collection, and before we start with the poem, I'd like to talk to you guys a bit more about Ocean Vuong himself. I do have an order in which I'm going to talk about different aspects of a poem, and one of those things is autobiographical background. Maybe you've learned in school that it's important to actually learn something about the person who wrote the work before actually analyzing it, because then you will actually be able to adapt it to the poet's life, but it's not necessary if you do it on your own. I will talk about this more when I talk about the speaker, which we will discuss. But let's talk about Ocean Vuong first. Ocean Vuong is a poet. He was born on the 14th of October 1988. He's currently 35 years old, and he was born in Vietnam. He moved to the US with his family when he was 2 years old. His family's history is very interesting. He identifies as gay. He currently lives in Northampton with his partner. I'm not going to talk too much about this now. I do want you to know who he is, because I feel like talking about poetry nowadays can't be discussed without knowing who Ocean Vuong is. He has won multiple awards: the Wedding Award for Poetry in 2016, the T.S. Eliot Prize in 2017, and the MacArthur Grant in 2019, which are huge accomplishments for a guy so young. He published 3 books. 2 of those are poetry collections. His novel On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous was published in 2019, followed by his 2 collections of poetry, Night Sky with Exit Wounds in 2020 and Time is a Mother in 2022. Something that I want to make quite clear: I still mess up when it comes to this point. The speaker is not the poet. You have a writer, you have the poet who writes the poem, but it does not mean that the person speaking in the poem is the poet themselves. So when you analyze a poem, you are supposed to say the speaker seems to be blah blah blah. If you just do it for fun, no worries, but that's something to definitely keep in mind. I still mess up, as I said. The correct technical term is speaker and not poet. Anyway, I think that's enough for the introduction. I hope I did not make this too boring. Let's get into it. As I said, I randomly chose a poem, but I was quite sure I was going to start with the first one. The first poem we have in this book is called Threshold. So the order in which we're going to do things is pretty simple. We're going to work from the inside to the outside. I know that's kind of weird, but if you watch my video on how to read poetry, you may remember this thing where I kind of wanted to show you my understanding of the anatomy of a poem. You have the skeleton, which is the backbone really like the skeleton, the way a poem is built in a way, with amount of stanzas, amount of verses, rhyme, rhythm, meter, and punctuation. And then you have the muscles, the organs, everything, which includes imagery, the stylistic devices, historical, autobiographical background, the title, and the significance of the unwritten word. A poem is incredibly versatile. There's so much to look at, and in order not to overwhelm ourselves, I made this graphic to kind of guide us along the body of this poem. But let's just start with looking at it from the outside. So what do we have? We have a poem with a title. It is titled, first of all. That we're going to look at it in depth later. And you have a poem that is built in couplets. Couplets are 2 lines building 1 stanza. We have 12 couplets and 1 single line, which is just consistent of 2 words. So that is something interesting. The significance of the last 2 words being written in 1 line shows the amount of significance that the poet might have intended. We end the poem with a full stop. There's not a consistent rhyme scheme. We're not really dealing with a very, in my opinion, tidy poem. We're dealing with one that is a bit chaotic, all over the place. We have, seems to be random punctuation. Can tell you it's not random, especially with Ocean Vuong. You can expect that no way is there anything in a poem that is randomly done by him. So what looks like random punctuation might not be random punctuation. The meter, the rhythm is not consistent. That's what I can definitely say, especially with the full stops in between the lines. That always means a very long pause. Whenever there is a line break, whenever there is a pause, I take that seriously and I do pause. In modern poetry nowadays, lots of random line breaks in order for the poem to have like a nice aesthetic design, which does have purpose sometimes, but sometimes it breaks the entire rhythm and you're not able to read it well. I talked more about this in my Is This Poetry video. So if you don't know how to read it, make a pause after every single line break and after punctuation maybe. So we talked about the skeleton of it, and in the interpretation you would now say, what does it do? So let's talk a bit about that. What happens when the poet decides not to use a consistent rhyme scheme? It can happen that the poem becomes a bit unorganized. When I read this, I sort of got disoriented a bit. So there's this sort of disharmony that always happens when you don't have a consistent rhyme scheme or rhythm, which is beautiful in this poem. And if you read it, you realize that the poet actually actively remembers stuff. For example, when he says, he was singing, which is why I remember it. Pause. His voice, and then he stops. He actually puts a line in there. It filled me to the core. It's like his voice, the poet thinks, it filled me to the core. So this is the first point. The poet is actively remembering in this poem. Not the poet. The speaker is actively remembering in this poem. You really see it when you consider the line breaks. That's why they're so important. That's why punctuation and line breaks should be important in a poem. I could talk about this for hours, but I will not. Let's talk about the title, Threshold. It is absolutely beautifully done because the poem Threshold can be found on page 3. The next poem in this collection is on page 7. You have 2 pages that are empty, sort of filler pages, in between Threshold and the next poem, Telemachus. It is so beautiful because you, as the reader, you're standing on the threshold to this book. You're actively standing there and waiting to be invited. And with this poem, he invites you into this collection to read it and take a pause after this poem to step into the book, step into the house, and then get on with the other poem. It is beautiful because this title alone does not only have one intention. You as the reader are standing on the threshold to this book, as I said, but the title connected to the poem also means something because this speaker in the poem talks about spying on his father while showering. As he's looking through the keyhole, he is also on a threshold. We have the story, we know what's happening in this poem in the first part. So he's spying on his father, then something happens, and in the end he's talking about loss. He says, I lost it all with my eyes wide open. Let's look at the stylistic devices. The ones that were obvious to me, obviously I bet I missed a lot because I'm really not into that whole thing anymore. It's been a long time since I analyzed poetry. We have a lot of repetitions. First one being in the body where everything has a price. Repetitions mean it's important. This is something of great significance. The poet emphasizes that by repeating it. That first line threw me off. In the body where everything has a price, I was a beggar. On my knees, I watched through the keyhole, not the man showering, but the rain. I'm going to stop right there because the line in the body where everything has a price, I thought about the body maybe being a metaphor to the world. So the speaker wants to experience things, he's begging for experience, because I understood the price as a metaphor to experience and the pain that can come with it. And then later when he says, I didn't know the cost, so again, the cost connecting to the price, I didn't know the cost of entering a song was to lose your way back. The song obviously connects to the speaker's father, who he watched singing in the shower. My first immediate thought was, yeah, when you enter a song, when you enter another person's life, you will be changed no matter what. It's like the experience that comes with it. It's just the outcome in the end after maybe losing someone, because the risk you take of entering someone else's life, of being a part of their life, always means that there is something to lose because you gain something. So that was my thought, that I would connect with the hole in the body where everything has a price. I was a beggar. Just the position of them. So the father standing up and the speaker is behind something, this keyhole. In my opinion, the speaker in this poem is incredibly insecure and unknowledgeable. He repeats multiple times, coming back to repetitions. He repeats twice, I didn't know, I didn't know. For me, it showed the insecurity inside that speaker's mind. We've all spied through keyholes before. But the thing is, when you look through a keyhole, you only see a tiny little thing. You never see the entire picture. So in my head, there's this great distance between the speaker and their father. Even though he is intruding on such a private moment, he still doesn't know everything. Is that the only time he can connect to his father? Is that the only time he can really see the way this man actually is in such a private, vulnerable moment where the father usually thinks, oh yeah, I'm alone, so I'm going to be myself. This connected to the didn't know is kind of like another point of this speaker just not knowing not only what is going on, but also they may not know their father as well as they would like. I felt an incredible distance between the two characters, the two figures that are talked about in this poem. So let's go on. So I watched the keyhole, not the man showering, but the rain. The rain being a metaphor for the shower. It does look like rain, so we could actually think about, okay, what does this shower look like? Falling through him, guitar strings snapping over his globed shoulders. So the speaker lets us know what the father looks like. So a globed shoulders, does this mean that he's very strong, or does it mean that he maybe even has bad posture? So he has like this bit of a hunchback. That is something interesting, I thought. The guitar strings snapping was for me literally the rain looking like coming out in strings out of the shower head and then breaking upon impact on the person's head or on the person's body. So music is literally played. I mean, when you hear someone shower, you hear sounds, but the speaker sort of romanticizes this experience by turning the water of coming out of the shower into rain that makes music by touching the person's body. It's very vulnerable. When I talk about this, it feels very vulnerable to me. And this is sort of the first full stop where I thought, okay, yeah, this is really important. Over his globed shoulders, full stop. He was singing, which is why I remember it. Pause. Again, he's, as we already established, the speaker is actively remembering. He does repeat the lines he was singing, I remember. This is another sign that the speaker is actively remembering because he is repeating it. And this whole moment of watching his father shower has a great significance to him. In that moment, when the speaker tells the reader what is happening, he only remembers his father as the singing individual. They don't let us know if it was good. They don't let us know if the speaker enjoyed it, but he remembers that the person was singing. And that's what I mean in the unwritten word. And it was a very significant moment in their relationship, I bet. His voice and this pause, it filled me to the core. It is almost like an inane sentence we use multiple times in our daily lives. We have to remember it is a metaphor. Through this metaphor, they let us know this voice is incredibly impactful to the speaker. It filled me to the core like a skeleton. Even my name knelt down inside me, asking to be spared. So the skeleton, it's a simile because he says like. The words like and as always introduce a coming simile. So like a skeleton, he literally talks about the body. The body is a very important image in this poem. He starts the poem with that. You can actually see it literally. So the voice filling the body to the core, just like the skeleton, is inside yourself. And then even my name. And then he actively thinks again, knelt down inside me, asking to be spared. Everything that this person is inside of them. I see it very clearly in my mind right now how slowly everything from head to toe starts to fill up like water with this voice. And then there's this name buried inside of themselves. And the speaker is asking like, please don't let me forget myself. I'm forgetting who I am. I'm forgetting everything in this moment, because the first thing you kind of know about yourself is your name. So he's asking to be spared because hearing this voice, hearing the singing voice of the father is so astonishing that the speaker is starting to forget everything. Only this moment, only this voice is important right now and nothing else. I love that he cut the line after asking, knelt down inside me asking. It kind of leaves room for this answer, or the room is there because it's filled with hesitation. So to ask something is again vulnerable, and he hesitates before asking this because is he scared? Is he nervous? Why does he hesitate? All things to consider. All of those things are incredibly interesting to look into by just a line break. The difference between the first he was singing and the next he was singing, where we just arrived, is the punctuation. So in the first he was singing, there's a comma, and in the second he was singing, there's a full stop. It's sort of a finality. And then he says, it is all I remember. Is the all a hyperbole? Does he really only remember this moment? Here's why autobiography can come in, if you wanted to. Assuming the speaker is the poet himself. I remember reading that his father left their family after their move to the US. He was very small, so if you want to connect the two, you could think maybe this situation where he peeps through the keyhole, watching his father shower and hearing his voice, hearing him sing, witnessing that moment. Is that really everything that he remembers? Could be possible, could be. The thing about interpretation is always to word it as it could be. It seems like. In my opinion, there's no fact in an interpretation. Then he goes on to say, he was singing. It is all I remember. For in the body where everything has a price, I was alive. I didn't know there was a better reason. Also a line that I would love to hear your thoughts on, because in my opinion, this is the moment where the speaker comes back to himself, to the reality of the moment, to the present, and sort of stops the active remembering, but goes on to say what this moment means for him today. Because he goes on to say, he didn't know there was a better reason for sort of to be alive than being on his knees, paying a price for every single experience. So then he goes on to say, that one morning, my father would stop, a dark cold paused in downpour, and listen for my clutched breath behind the door. There was a morning where something happened, where something was different. He was looking through the keyhole. I read an interpretation that his father caught him. A dark cold paused in downpour. I actually had to look up the word cold because I didn't know what it meant. It's a young but mature horse. And I asked myself, is it the father? Was he a very young father? Was he just ready to be a father? I don't know. Stopped in a downpour, he is in the shower. Is it the father or is it the speaker? The line before sort of says, yeah, it is the father. And then he says, and listen for my clutched breath behind the door. In my opinion, the speaker is nervous. He knows what he's doing is wrong. I think everybody knows this thrill of doing something they weren't allowed to, and he knows this is wrong. So a possible interpretation is that the father caught the speaker behind the door, and then when he says, I didn't know the cost of entering a song was to lose your way back, in connection to the whole being caught, could mean there were consequences. Maybe something very terrible happened that he doesn't talk about. Maybe it's too hard to talk about it, or that they don't talk about. And they felt like they really lost in that moment. They were playing a game and they were losing because the father found out. Maybe. So we talked about this whole thing of entering a person's life and you never being the same afterwards, and things happening with another person could always mean consequences. So did this have consequences? Probably, because he then talks about losing. I put a little symbol above, I didn't know the cost, and then continuing, because that again is the moment where I feel like this is where the speaker stops reliving the moment and sort of starts reflecting on that moment. What do the consequences mean for the speaker in that moment? So the speaker is back to the present. He says, I didn't know the cost of entering a song was to lose your way back. So I entered, so I lost. I lost it all with my eyes wide open. Does this mean that the speaker lost the relationship to their father? Does it mean that they lost this moment of being able to be filled with the voice of the father singing? But this terrible feeling of loss, he puts it into perspective with another hyperbole. I lost it all with my eyes wide open. All, in my opinion, can always be a hyperbole. But for the speaker, it felt like I lost absolutely everything in that moment. And he says, I lost it all. He pauses, puts the last two words, wide open. before I forget that thought, because that was just coming into my head, you remember how we talked about looking through the keyhole and only being able to see a little part of something? The wide open could also be connected to the door that is now wide open. You know, maybe the consequence was the father stormed out of the door and, I don't know, screamed at the boy. Whatever the consequence was, it wasn't good. This wide open, does this mean that the speaker now knows everything? Because when he says he didn't know, does this mean he does know now? Again, an unwritten thing. Why I'm emphasizing that is because in the last video on how to read poetry, I talked about considering the unwritten words, so the things that the poet does not write. And this is such a moment. So does this mean he knows it all now? Because the way he phrases it, he says he didn't know. Does this mean he does know now? In my interpretation, he does now know, because he lived through this moment and now he knows. So this wide open can be connected to the speaker's knowledge now, or the speaker's mind being now open, being knowledgeable. When something is open, you can look through it, you can step into it, so the speaker is in a place of knowledge now. That's why I think the speaker is now back to the present and reflecting on this entire moment. This, I lost it all with my eyes wide open, also gave me the feeling of being powerless and having no say or choice in the matter, because the speaker knows everything, he saw it all, and still couldn't change the outcome. The outcome possibly meaning the father left, or the speaker never listening to the father's voice, or the speaker never talking to the father again. That is all up for interpretation. That's the room Ocean leaves us. To lose something while looking at it is so incredibly painful, and you still can't do anything about it. We've gone through the entire poem. We talked about a lot of things, and I actually don't know if it made much sense, but these were just thoughts that I wrote down. Let's sort of summarize. So the speaker has a habit of watching their father shower. Through the keyhole, the speaker is not aware of everything that's going on in his father's life, in his life. It's an invasion of privacy. Then I asked myself, is that the only way the reader can connect to the father? The speaker is fully immersed in the song. Reference to "It Filled Me to the Core." It's a precious moment, even though it's all he can remember. So it's a moment of great importance, and we can gather that the speaker was very small while that happened, because I have never really heard of an adult peeping through keyholes. It's usually something associated to kids. It is all he remembers. When you are very small, you don't remember a lot of things, but he does remember this. So the rain, the song, the guitar strings sort of romanticized this encounter a bit in the beginning. The enjambements, the use of punctuation meant for me that the speaker is envisioning this moment. The emotions I felt were feelings of insecurity, powerlessness, nervousness with the clutched breath, the innocence of this maybe happening to just a child. And I also wrote down about the lack of a consistent rhyme and rhythm scheme to really emphasize on this actively remembering moment. I'm gonna leave it at that. I probably forgot things. I hope it wasn't too chaotic. It was a lot of fun. I loved looking into this poem. Again, I want to emphasize, you don't always need to analyze poetry, but this is just something that was my goal of this year, especially in June now, to spend some time with a poem. This was the first video of this little series. I really hope you like it. I put a lot of work into these videos. So if you want to comment down below what you thought of the poem, or if you want to give me constructive feedback, please let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts. So, you know, show me by, I don't know, liking this video, commenting down below. If you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, I also started posting things on TikTok. So if you want to look into that, it is linked down below, as well as my Instagram accounts. And yeah, I think this is it. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Happy Pride Month, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!